Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning into our presentation, Escaping Slavery in Middle Florida, the Underground Railroad and Beyond, sponsored by Florida Humanities. We're filming today at Monticello Opera House in our historic upstairs theater. We do have a small audience of invited guests, masked and socially distanced, and our panelists are socially distanced. We are foregoing the masks for audio reasons. We want to begin the panel discussion today with the showing of the film Underground by Akil Dupont, who is one of our panelists. The film was co-written and directed by Dupont. It has been shown in 60 countries, in 21 film festivals. It's won 21 awards, including 2 Student Emmy Awards. So now please enjoy Underground.
We slave away on master's land.
Let my people go.
Oppressed so hard we cannot stand.
Let my people go.
It's late, Granny. Why are you out here all by yourself?
Come, child.
Aren't you tired?
I got my mind fixed on something else. Sit down, let me talk to you. We need not always weep and mourn.
Let my people go.
And where the slavery chains for long.
Let my people go.
Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go.
Woke up this morning with an ache in my back. Got up this morning, no time to relax. We see her at the door, can't sit no more. Marcy getting richer, and the slaves stay poor. Lord, while we're here, it ain't for shucking no corn. Ain't no freedom here. You sure wasn't ever born. Around this time another year, I may be gone out in a lonely graveyard. Lord, how long you can beat on my body, but you can't harm my soul. You won't be selling my children, can't beat her no more. These will all be saved on this day the Lord made. Before I go home being a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord. He's setting me free. Oh, freedom, freedom over me.
Well, you interested in any of them? How about that youngin' over there?
How many years is she?
I'd say she's about 7.
I aim to take her tonight.
You wait one fortnight, we got us a better gamble on getting out.
No.
ain't got time to wait.
Is she from good stock?
That's her pa working back there. I sold her mother to another plantation 2 states over. They were real pleased with her.
You find this here pattern, you done find a house to keep you safe.
Tell me, girl, that child there, she a good worker?
Yes, sir. Amala, a good girl. I tended to her since she was a baby.
God help you.
Oh. They'll be dead by morning.
It's okay, baby. Come on.
This is foolish. She's just a child. She won't ever make it.
She my child. Now you should have minded your own business and stayed put. Well, come on now.
The only place I'm going is back to that house with that child in tow.
Now, ain't nobody going back to that house. When he find you, he gonna whoop you to no end. Till he find out where we's headed. Then all this will be for nothing.
Bali, I won't say nail word.
You think he won't make you talk?
You bound to get caught out there. And when they find you, when they find her,
I reckon we ain't got much of a chance. But if you go back there, that mean we ain't got nothing to hope for.
Who's out there?
Come on, come on. God, keep your feet moving.
I'm tired. God, please don't take me like this.
God's up on no trouble.
I won't have another child of mine sold off 100 miles away from me. Plain and simple.
You done lost your mind.
You know what it feels like to have a child of yours took right from under you.
They're gonna catch us.
Lord, help me.
Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Well, who are these children all dressed in red?
God's gonna trouble the water.
Well, it must be the children that Moses led.
God's gonna trouble the water. Oh, God's children.
Where'd he go?
They ain't here. Follow me.
God's gonna trouble the water.
If you get there before I do,
God's gonna trouble the water.
tell all my friends I'm coming too.
God's gonna trouble the water.
I got to get me a closer look. Y'all stay here.
You find this here pattern, and you done found a house to keep you safe.
And she gonna get it. A real bed with a blanket that don't itch. And a real supper that ain't cornmeal and pork fat. You think just because you've been up at that big house that you know a damn thing about slavery?
I know what it's like to be called down and be whipped. Have old Massa have his way with me. Have my baby taken from me before I even got a chance to know her. I am a poor pilgrim of sorrow down in this wide world all alone. I've started to make heaven my home. Sometimes I'm both tossed and driven. Sometimes I don't know where to roam. But I heard of a city called heaven, and I've started to make that city mine home.
He wasn't meaning to make you upset, Miss Danby.
I reckon we better find us a place to sleep for the night. And I'll find us food. I didn't mean you no harm.
Swing low, sweet for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. I looked over Jordan and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home.
If you get there before I do, coming for to carry me home, tell all my friends I'm coming for to carry me home.
Miss Denby, they'll catch us out there.
You were meant to be free, baby. All of us was.
You there! Stop running! Stop running, I said!
See, baby? Look like Jesus smiled on us.
Hurry up. Get in.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming to carry me home.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.
Well, Akil, I think I speak for everyone here when I say thank you for such an incredibly moving and inspirational and well-made film.
Well, thank you for showing it. It brought back a flood of memories. And it's I haven't watched it in a few years, and so to see it on the screen again, it was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So I think I'm going to ask our speakers to self-introduce today and just give us a few sentences about your background. You're all extremely well qualified to be here today, and we appreciate every one of you. Starting with you, Akil, just a little bit about your background and, your general.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hey, my name is Akil Dupont. I'm from Tallahassee, Florida. I have an undergrad degree from Florida A&M University in economics and a master's in film production from Florida State University. I live in the Atlanta area, and I teach for the state of Georgia at an organization called the Georgia Film Academy, and I teach film production over there, and I'm still, of course, a filmmaker and a storyteller on film and in theater.
All right. Jay.
I'm Jay Welch. I'm originally from Hillsborough County, Florida. I attended the University of Florida for 7 years. I got 2 degrees from there, though. I got my bachelor's and my master's from there starting in 2004. I became a professor of history at our local college here, now North Florida College. It's gone through a few name changes over the years. I was the department chair for history from, I think, 2009 to 2020. And I've taught, basically if it has the word history in it in our college catalog, I've taught it. So American history 1 and 2, world history, Western civilization, African American history, world in the 20th century, etc. So I'm glad to be here today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Anthony Dixon. I am originally from Georgia. I spent most of my life here in Florida. I'm an adjunct professor from time to time. My background is in history. I have degrees from Florida A&M University and a PhD in history from Indiana University. Currently, I am the owner of Archival and Historical Research Associates, a public history research firm.
Good afternoon. I'm David Ward. I'm a local here. I live here in Monticello and grew up here. I've got 2 degrees, one in biology from Florida State University and another in history from University of Florida. I have served as the Jefferson County property appraiser, so I know where most things are in this county, and I currently serve on the board of the Monticello Opera House, and thankfully we have some other board members here. Glad to see them here. And I also serve on the board of Osceola Research Institute, and I am retired, so I can devote a lot of time to things I just want to do.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. The concept behind this event was combining artistic, inspiring program with educational information. So we wanted to take this opportunity to think about the experience of the characters in the film and how that might relate to enslaved persons in this area. And to begin with, though, we just wanted to provide some background, historical context. And I know that a lot of people were curious about the term Middle Florida, because we don't think of where we are now as Middle Florida. And Jay, I was wondering if you could kind of maybe enlighten us a little bit, and I'll try to find. You said you had a map in here. Let's see.
Yeah, if you want to bring up, there's one of the pictures I put in the slideshow. It's a map with a red portion at the right. That one right there. Most of the history of the United States as a country, of course, predates. It was a series of British colonies, but most of the settlement patterns it's sort of like a windshield wiper, is the way I explain it to my students, and it goes most of the time in American history from east to west. But Florida, we're 90 degrees off, and it went, for the most part, from north to south because of our odd geography as a peninsula that sticks out into the ocean. And so what you would see here is in 1820, the United States acquired Florida from Spain, and that opened up that border, this border where we are here in Monticello, to settlement by Americans, both white and black. And it went from a north to south perspective. And so when we talk about slavery, though, that does fix us a little bit into a chronological window, because of slavery, of course, is going to come to an abrupt end in 1865 with the end of the Civil War. And so where were people in Florida in general? And for the most part, it was heavily concentrated in what now we refer to as North Florida. And of course, it's interesting because because of the 20th century, there's been a population inversion. South Florida is now where the people are, and our part of Florida is kind of where we get to have a little bit of elbow room, and it's more rural. But in, for example, the 1850s, which was the 1850s, and really the Civil War itself, the 4 years of the Civil War, this was the height of slavery in Florida. This was when it was reaching its apex here in Florida, unlike, say, Virginia, which it had gone up, and then you get to the late 1700s, and it actually starts declining a little bit. It had already gone through a more mature life cycle, whereas in Florida, they're coming in here, and so it's this northern tier where the population is. And there were really three kind of sections of Florida. Now, if you tell people you're from Florida, you kind of have to tell them which part of Florida you're from, and I'm sure that all of you guys, when you travel around, you tell them, like, well, what part of Florida are you from? They think we all either live at the beach or at Disney World, or maybe Disney World's at the beach. They don't know. And I say, no, I don't live in the beach part of Florida. I live in the Palmetto and Black Creek part of Florida. There's North Florida, there's Central Florida, there's West Florida, Panhandle Florida. But you would have had West Florida, which would have been about the Appalachia River over to the Perdido, to the western border of the state. And then you would have had East Florida, which was, for the most part, this little band from the Suwannee River out to the Atlantic Ocean. But the really populated part was where we were in between those two river boundaries, which would have been Middle Florida. And you see this on a lot of maps, and I found this one here because I wanted to get a lot sort of said with just one image. And what we're seeing here is the heavy cotton production of Middle Florida. This is also a coincidence of where the highest proportion of enslaved persons would have been in, say, the 1850s or the 1860s. Actually, the highest, if you look at by percentage, would have been Leon County itself. So Tallahassee, where you're from, at the height of slavery, 73% of the population in Leon County were in fact enslaved African Americans. And so that was really the height of this. And that's where this term, kind of comes from. And it's directly related to the fact that, where are the colonists? When we talk about the pioneers of Florida, there are three types of people that come into Florida. You have your wealthy or upwardly mobile, the people that will form the planter class. They're the ones, and they are bringing in the slaves, who of course are, they're not exactly volunteers for this. They're brought along because slavery migrates. It migrated across America. One of the things that you saw during this period after the invention of the cotton gin, cotton was not something that was grown before really the 1790s or something in very large amounts. You'd grow it some here and some there. It was a very specialty niche market because it was so expensive to produce. But with the invention of the cotton gin, all of a sudden it becomes 5, 6, 7 times easier to clean, and now all of a sudden everybody can afford a cotton shirt or a cotton pair of drawers or something like that. And so you needed to have a much greater expansion and economy of scale. And so now that meant all of a sudden slavery, which was actually starting to die out in America. It had been mostly tobacco slavery, some rice slavery, indigo for dyes and things like that. And it was starting to reach its zenith. The American Revolution, kind of was starting to, maybe we should take that all men are created equal thing seriously. And then cotton comes in, and there's so much money on it that then it goes in very much the other direction. But the upper tier states, your Virginias, your Marylands, your Tennessees, your Kentuckys, they actually start selling slaves to the deeper South. and it starts moving south and west. And you can just watch this on a map here as it starts coming into our region. Right as Florida becomes opened up, you've got the planters bringing in the slaves. The third group is what is often colloquially referred to as the Florida crackers. These were the white yeoman farmers. They were called this because of cracking of the whips as they were herding cattle. The Spanish had let cattle go in the region, particularly in like the Alachua County kind of area, and some other places. And these guys were getting free cattle, and so they're cracking the whips and they're getting cattle. Not as germane to our part of the story, but when we look at what this was, that was very much where this was. It was actually the beginning sort of fingertip of industrialization that had turned slavery around. It had been something that was starting to sort of wane. A lot of people, you read commentaries from the 1780s, the 1790s, maybe slavery's had its day, right? And that we need to move in a different direction because if it's not making anybody money, pretty much everybody recognized it was a hassle. George Washington went through this in the 1790s, which was the last decade of his life, of saying, I don't really think that this is a system that's going to work, but he didn't know really how to get rid of it, and so that's why Washington, it was in his will. Once I'm dead and gone, I'll let other people free my slaves, and that's how he freed his own slaves, was posthumously, it was in his will. But that's what you see here it was industry that had made cotton suddenly super profitable, which created this massive demand for field hands. The system of slavery is already endemic in the South, and that brings it here to Florida. But when we talk about slavery and what it was on a day-to-day basis, and I'm going to touch stone on the film because the film really does get a lot done with talking about the variegated experiences. The father character, right? He's actually highly skilled. He's shown as a blacksmith in the film. The female slave that goes with them on this escape journey, she specifically references that she's a house slave. She would have been somebody that would have either cooked or done the clothing or the mending. They did do occasionally some industry with house slaves where they made socks and they would sell them on the open market, or clothes or some other things like that. But this would have been a person that would have had a very different experience. But you get the sense, and I don't know, you may correct me if I'm wrong, but they showed the little girl and she's working with corn and she's feeding the animals and she's going to be sold and maybe sold as a field hand, which would have been a very different,
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
All right. And that's part of the reason I think the dad, no, I don't want that experience for my daughter, because these were the people that would have treated really the worst. Particularly in these very large plantations, they were the ones that were worked the hardest. There was actually a rating system for slaves. There were shares. You were a full field hand or half a field hand or something like that, and you would have been treated accordingly. Women were, of course, treated as less. The perception was that women were not physically as able to keep up with the rigor of working cotton or corn or indigo or rice, or depending on what part of the South you were working in. But it was actually usually your more highly skilled slaves who a lot of times tended to be the ones that were more likely to escape. The reason for that, if you could be a blacksmith, if you could shoe horses, if you could make barrels, if you were a musician. There were a number of skills, because these plantations, particularly the very large ones, were tried to be self-contained units where you could kind of do everything that you needed to do on the plantation. And so you had some people that were pretty highly skilled, right? And these were the people that tended to be the ones that wanted to escape because they could get away and realize, I could get a job. I could get paid doing this. Where if the only thing that you knew how to do was pick cotton and you were good at that, nobody's going to hire you to do this. This was actually one of the problems that the poor whites ran into. When we talk about the problem of slavery, was they couldn't get jobs doing the things that you would normally expect poor, unskilled people to do, because the rich people in their area, they already had people for that, and we don't have to pay them. They're slaves. And so it's interesting when you talk about the influx of slavery and how it has a depressive effect, not only obviously on the slaves themselves, but on the white people that live around them as well. And so that's that's Middle Florida. That's what's sort of a just brief primer on what it was like here, 1850s or so, at the height of slavery.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. I was also, and I'm glad you brought out the variety of the experiences of enslaved persons is widely varied. And I'm also really interested in escape and the logistics of escape. And I'll just kind of throw this out to all the panelists. But, you know, the title, Underground Railroad and Beyond, as Jay explained, we're the beyond. We're really not too far away from the northern safe places for slaves to escape to. So there are differences, but I'm intrigued by, you know, if you're an enslaved person, you know, even though we are not the Underground Railroad, these persons needed many of the elements of the Underground Railroad to safely escape. They needed information. They needed to know where to go. They needed guides, maybe. Did they need maps? And just thinking about opportunity, you know, darkness could be an opportunity to escape, weather or travel. David, I know you have a story coming up in a bit about, you know, the death of an owner. That creates an opportunity. I was wondering if any of you could speak to that. I mean, even Akil, maybe in the making of the film, or Dr. Dixon, I know you've got some things to say about the African diaspora. But just kind of speaking to that, is there any differences? Yes, Dr. Dixon.
Yes. I think it's important to understand that the Underground Railroad first came to Florida. When the Spanish controlled La Florida, this was a destination for runaway slaves from the English colonies. So understanding that dynamic is very important. And that dates all the way back to even the first beginning of Florida exploration. Even as far back as 1513, when explorations were beginning to branch out from the Caribbean, they made a comment, and there was actually a word that went out amongst not only the Spanish people, but to all Europeans as well, to mind the relationship between Africans and Native Americans, because they seem to have this relationship that they didn't understand. And we now know it's because Africans had been coming to the Americas long before Christopher Columbus. But at that particular time, they didn't understand that relationship. They only knew that there was one. And so it's important to understand that even at the very first attempt at colonization and the first attempt at settlement, which was Galdape, which is present-day Sapelo Island, Georgia. This settlement was actually a failure, just like the others, of course. When the French first come with Fort Caroline, that's a failure, and Roanoke for the English is a failure, where the Spanish came first, and their first attempt was a failure, but it was primarily because the Guale Native Americans attacked the settlement. And when they attacked the settlement, they enticed the enslaved Africans to actually burn the settlement down while they were raiding the settlement. And so what this did was it started the first inklings of what we call the Maroon Society. And this beginning where Native Americans and African slaves began to resist plantation society and live in La Florida as free persons of color. And so we have to understand that Florida had this relationship starting really officially in the 1690s with the Edict of 1693, where the Spanish king basically says any African enslaved person that leaves the English colony, they can come to La Florida and live for free. And that all they need to do was two main things. They needed to decide whether or not they were going to live under Spanish authority or they were going to eke out their own existence as Maroon societies. And then the second thing was they had to alert Spanish authorities if they saw the English plantation society encroaching into La Florida. So it's important to understand that enslaved Africans and enslaved African Americans understood that La Florida and Florida was a place of safe haven, that there were Africans living in Maroon societies here long before the English colonies began to really develop into what we call the United States. So by the time we do get to the 1800s, it's a well-known fact that there is an established relationship between Native Americans and escaped slaves. and that they are cohabitating in the wilderness of Florida together. So by the time we get to the 1800s, that relationship is already established. So the idea of the Underground Railroad is still moving forward, so to speak, during that time as well.
Okay, interesting. So was then the Native American settlements and societies, was that the only place for Florida enslaved persons to escape to? I mean, was that primarily?
Well, for most of the period, particularly when we're talking about La Florida, then we're talking about Florida as a territory. Florida, we have to remember, Florida was only the United States into statehood for about 15 years before they left and went into the Confederacy. So we're talking about primarily the period of La Florida and then the period of Florida being territory. But for the most part, these escaped Africans are eking out their own existence, and they are cohabitating, and they're living in a relationship with Native Americans in close-by villages, and that develops into what we call the Seminole Nation, and we'll get into that a little bit later.
Oh, okay, great. Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Mike, I've got a little bit extra to add to what he was saying. If you want to go, take the slide maybe up a couple of ones. Go up. Yeah, this is a painting here. This is Fort Mose, what exactly he was talking about, the edict of the Spanish king to allow escaped slaves to move into Florida. And the Spanish that were then living in St. Augustine, typically what you saw with escaped slaves of African descent was they typically lived in these satellite communities, whether it was the Spanish or later with the Seminoles. And they participated in the defense. The English made 2 major assaults on St. Augustine, and they helped defend what they saw as freedom, because they knew that the English, if they got a hold of them, they were going to drag them back to slavery. And I know there's going to be more on maybe Black Seminoles later if you want to take it down one more. But the Maroon societies that he was talking about was really interesting, because the Africans really, these people of African descent, they brought their own sensibilities to life in Florida, living amongst the Seminoles. The Seminoles living a typical, kind of Neolithic hunter-gatherer lifestyle. They had adapted to the cattle, whereas it was the Africans who really, in some regards, benefited them the most, because they tended to live in these agricultural communities just outside, raising corn and other foodstuffs that the Seminoles found to be very helpful to their society. And this was a really beneficial relationship to both. And this was actually one of the problems that, as the Second Seminole War began, many of the people who had been escaped slaves here in Florida amongst the Seminoles, they were the ones that backed Osceola, because there were various branches in the Seminole community of, should we fight? Should we make peace with the United States? What should we do? And of course, the former slaves, we don't make peace with these people. They're just going to grab us and they're going to throw us back into slavery. And so some escaped physically to the Bahamas. They literally took boats to try to get away from this. Many of them that were living and as far as we could tell, dressing and their culture had become that of Seminoles. They had to do separate deals with the United States. So they, okay, we will surrender, but you got to promise not to enslave us. And so that's how you wind up with many of these Black Seminole communities out in what is now Oklahoma from this. And so yeah, it was a very different situation here in Florida than what you might see elsewhere in the South.
Okay, thank you. I imagine there's a lot of success stories to tell with these formerly enslaved people, going on to do wonderful things. David, I know you have a story about an enslaved person related to the Gadsden family. I thought maybe you would share that with us.
I'm fortunate enough to have access to some original documents here in Jefferson County, and I want to speak briefly about the Gadsden family and their time here in Jefferson County, which is actually continuing up to the present. But James Gadsden came into this area with Andrew Jackson in 1818, when this was a Spanish, La Florida was Spanish. Well, Andrew Jackson had come out of the War of 1812 and was probably the most prominent Southern general in the southern area at that time. And they had problems with the escaped slaves using Spanish Florida as a destination. And in 1818, they sent a gunboat up the Apalachicola River to the Negro fort there, which was populated by escaped slaves. Got a lucky shot in there very early, hit the powder magazine, huge explosion, and wiped out almost the entire population of that fort. But James Gadsden had come with Andrew Jackson through this area. There was a battle with the Seminole Indians in Lake Miccosukee, which is the boundary of Jefferson County and Leon County now. James Gadsden got to see this area and saw the potential for agriculture in this area. I think it was a foregone conclusion that this area of Florida would become part of the United States as they were expanding, and their idea of manifest destiny was put into action. But James Gadsden spotted this area, the Red Hills. This has been the area that Spanish missions had been. There were old Indian fields that were easily converted into the cotton fields that they desired to have. And Gadsden came in and established himself as very early after the original survey of the territory of Florida, and soon realized that he needed people. He needed slaves to do what he wanted to do to make a living here with and prosper off the cotton that was a new and very valuable crop. So he went back to Charleston, where his family was from, and brought back his brother, Octavius Gadsden, and slaves that they had in South Carolina. And they prospered here, more so under the guidance of Octavius Gadsden, his brother. James Gadsden was more of a military man and was doing things, ambassador to Mexico, the Gadsden Purchase, which I'm sure you've heard of. But they prospered here. They were next door neighbors with Prince Murat. I think he ended up with a lot of the property he had because he was not a very good farmer and wasn't a good businessman, but very colorful. But one of the things I wanted to bring up was this is a picture of James Gadsden, the son of Octavius Gadsden. And if you'll look at his uniform, they have a V, and that is his uniform for the Florida 5th Infantry in the Confederacy. Now, he grew up here on Wassissa Plantation, which later became incorporated in what we would probably, locals would know as El Destino Plantation. But James Gadsden was the son of Octavius Gadsden and was a young man at the outset of the Civil War. And he had a servant that grew up with him, and which was fairly common at the time. The servant grew up right alongside of him. They were expected to he was helpful in anything the young man was trying to do here. And can we go to the next slide there? This is an 1874 picture of that body servant or slave that worked alongside James Gadsden. And this gentleman's name is Pompey Jenkins. And Pompey accompanied James Gadsden with the Florida 5th Infantry. They mustered out in the spring of 1862. They participated in the Second Battle of Manassas in August of 1862. And then very soon after that, September 17th of 1862, James Gadsden and the Florida 5th participated in the Battle of Antietam, or as Confederates call it, the Battle of Sharpsburg. James Gadsden was killed there. It was a one-day battle. It was the single most bloody day in American military history. Well, Pompey Jenkins had accompanied him up there to that area to help out in camp and assist his master. Well, the master was killed, and the correspondence later with the family indicated that he had searched the field for 3 days afterwards and never was able to find the body of his master, James Gadsden. Well, by that time, the Confederate Army had retreated back into Virginia, and here Pompey was in Maryland, which is Union territory, and he apparently was taken in by a Quaker family in Pennsylvania, and later on attached himself with a prominent family in Philadelphia. And by 1874, he came down to accompany Mr. Biddle, who was the prominent man that he was attached himself to, and they came to Charleston. Well, Pompey knew the Gadsden family that had come down to Jefferson County to the Wassissa Plantation. He's very familiar with them, and by all indications could read and write. He was taught to read and write. And I have a letter that I could read. I printed it out, but it's not a real long letter, but it was composed on the Biddle letterhead from Charleston, South Carolina, May 19th, 1874. And he's addressing this letter to the widow of James Gadsden, the first man you saw, the one that was killed at Antietam. And he says, Madam Gadsden. Now, let me say too, this is a handwritten letter. I don't think Pompey wrote the letter, but he could read and write. But I'm sure he dictated it, or it was an effort by Pompey and this Mr. Biddle. Madam Gadsden, I'm in Charleston. I came here last Saturday. I went over to Mount Pleasant today and had the pleasure of seeing Mr. Tom Fisher Gadsden and also his mother. His sister was not at home now. They all were very well and inquired particularly about the family, how you were getting along. Tomorrow, if nothing happens, I will call on Mrs. Elizabeth Gadsden. Day after tomorrow, I expect to leave Charleston for New York and then take the cars to Philadelphia. If I am spared when I get home, I will send you my address. And there was a word I couldn't make out there, but to answer my letter, if you please, and tell me all the news you can. Please remember me respectfully to your brother. I've had my photographs taken and send you one. I hope you will take care of it and keep it, for fear you should never see me again, because I am going north with a gentleman from Philadelphia. And if I suit him, and if the climate agrees with me, I will stay with him for some time. I must bring my letter to a close. I remain your true and faithful servant in time that has been. Pompey Jenkins. And then it gives the address of Mr. Robert Biddle, 513 Commerce Street, Philadelphia. That was where the letters to him should be addressed. Now, what I think this reveals in some respects, and it's just a microcosm of what was there, Pompey Jenkins was given an opportunity to escape, and he took that opportunity. And from what the family has said, apparently he ended up running a hotel in New York City and did quite well for himself. But it was the skills that he had learned here on the Gadsden-Wassissa plantation that are so revealing. The Gadsden family had servants in livery. And this was a well-to-do plantation. And Pompey had learned many of the social skills that you wouldn't expect from a field laborer, but he was not a field laborer. I'm sure he learned to cook and prepare food and set tables and many of the social skills that came in handy as he left. But the revealing thing is, while he did not come back, and I think he saw what he had as a better life, he was not at all unsympathetic or not fond of the Gadsden family. He obviously was very fond of them and thought a lot of them. So it's a more nuanced approach to the whole issue of slavery and the issue of the Underground Railroad, but this is one example and a local example of what an individual faced there.
Obviously, he, with the death of his master, just left and went north. And what was that common, or was it, you know?
Well, one of the also the nuanced things here is after the Battle of Antietam was when Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. So according to the federal government, Pompey Jenkins had every right to do exactly what he did.
Mm-hmm. Even when you mentioned George Washington before, and George Washington, when he passed, his enslaved people went to his wife.
Well,
if I remember,
it was actually kind of complicated because he had married into a family. She possessed slaves from her previous marriage, and so he had possessed slaves that he had inherited through his family, and he had that slave population had increased through the normal means.
Right.
And so because he actually Washington was actually like a lot of your larger slave owners, didn't have a plantation, a single contiguous plot. Washington actually had seven distinct plantations, little farms that were in satellite kind of communities to each other, and you could get to them a few miles, a horseback ride. And it created a complication because he, as the owner, the legal owner, he had the right to, on his death, he could have taken his slaves and said, okay, because Washington had no natural children, but he had essentially kind of adopted his wife Martha's children from her previous marriage as his own, and said, well, I'm going to will certain slaves to this one, or I can will all of my slaves to this person. You could kind of, they were property, legally speaking. And so you could do with them what you wanted. He decided to take the opportunity, though, to manumit, to set them free. But it created a problem because he had the legal right to free his own slaves, but not the legal right to free her slaves that she had inherited previously. And that created the problem of, what about if you'd had one of Washington's slaves that had married one of her slaves and they had produced a child? And so the executors of Washington's will actually had to weave through that legal tangle. It actually took years and years and years to go through Washington's will and get it all separated out. The same kind of thing happened later. Robert E. Lee, who we remember as the great Confederate Civil War general, despite the fact that he's trying to help the South win the Civil War, just really found slavery disgusting. He inherited several slaves in a will from someone. And the will's requirements were, you need to try to take them and make a profit out of them. And so he said, okay, well, if that's what you have to do. And so he worked them for a while, didn't really do anything. And then he said, okay, time's up. You guys are all free. And he set them free. So when we talk about the complex nature of the relationships, we like to kind of think that it's this very sort of straightforward kind of relationship, that you've got slaves and you've got masters, and they all felt the same way about each other, and it was, and it was not like that. Reading, for example, over in Madison, Florida, there was a black man, and he had been a slave, and he had attended with the Floridians that had gone off to fight for the Confederacy, and there's a letter that's extant from the 1890s, and he is writing to one of his white friends, are you going to the Veterans Parade? Which was a pretty typical thing for veterans to do, the 1880s, 1890s, and it was these ex-Confederate soldiers, and he had been a servant. You know, he had done the cooking, he had done the cleaning up around camp, he'd hauled a lot of the stuff, because generally blacks did not wind up in combat for the Confederacy, but it did happen sometimes. And he wanted to know, he says, hey, I can't make it, my knee's getting bad, you know, I'm getting on up there in years. I hope you're going, though, because he says in the letter, he says, we're drapping off mighty fast, meaning that our generation's starting to die. You know, we're starting to get into our 60s and our 70s now, and you should go and do this. And we kind of look at this now and go, yeah, come on, a black guy, you know, fighting in the Confederate Army, it doesn't really fit. But that's, these people, they had to find ways to get along with each other. And so, you know, your discussion on the Civil War, actually, I want to kind of loop it back a little bit, because here in Florida, like I said, everything is a little bit delayed for what we're talking about with slavery. It takes a while for it to reach its apogee. And of course, one of the major problems, like we're talking about with the film, of escaping, was distance. The idea that you're going to walk from Gadsden County, you know, or from Jefferson County to Freedom in Pennsylvania, say. Ooh, that's a long trip. You look at much of the Underground Railroad, and it's actually from the northern tier states, where it's a much shorter hop. And if you have to get all the way to Canada, where you've got a 100% guarantee of it, that's a much shorter distance. But, and if you want, the other map that I've got in the slideshow, if you want to advance that, the Civil War ameliorated that problem, which was starting here in 1862, the Union Army started invading. And as Mr. Ward mentioned, right, with January 1st, 1863, you have Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which was, if you're living in a place in rebellion to the United States government, your slaves are all free now. And it was essentially, an encouragement to get away. Legally speaking, you don't have to be a slave anymore. The problem was, how do you get to where you can actually physically enforce your freedom? Well, throughout 1862, Florida started getting invaded by the Union Army. They had captured, by the end of the year, they had captured basically all of the major seaboard cities. So Pensacola, St. Augustine, Jacksonville, Tampa, they're all in Union hands. And so now, if you're an enslaved person, you don't have to make it all the way to Philadelphia. You just make it to the Union lines. And that's what you started seeing more and more and more, was this was part of this policy that if you were a freed slave, or if you were an escaped slave, you could fight for the freedom of other slaves. And that was what they were kind of counting on. And so there were a number of campaigns here in Florida. If you want to click down to the soldiers that we have fighting here in Florida, the African-American soldiers, there we go. These are reenactors. I'm a Civil War reenactor. It's one of my side endeavors. And every year, the Battle of Olustee in Lake City, it's the largest Civil War battle in Florida. We helped put that on. And there were actually 2 regiments of African-American soldiers made up of either freed persons or escaped slaves. And they were sent down here from South Carolina to participate in that campaign. But a larger battle that took place also near here, the Battle of Natural Bridge, which was an attempt to capture Tallahassee, most of the Union infantry were in fact black soldiers that were recruited out of the Fort Myers area to go and fight. We've got Marianna, Florida, that was nearby. And this gave the opportunity to, if you were a slave, if you could get to Union lines, the trick was, how do you enforce your freedom? Because you couldn't just, go knock on the master's door and, hey, slavery's been great, but I resign, right? That wasn't really an option. You had to physically be able to get away, and the film, shows that. They catch the one guy, and they kill him, and it was not a nice system. So you've got to be able to get away, and the Union Army's incursion into Florida, 62 through the end of the war, gave that opportunity.
Awesome, great, thank you. Excellent background. So Akil, we want to come to you and just begin to talk about your experience as an emerging artist and filmmaker, and kind of maybe getting more towards the artistic side of this discussion, talk about how you came to choose film school, and and then maybe moving on to your inspiration to create this particular film and kind of how all that unfolded.
Sure, absolutely. First, let me say this has been fascinating to listen to you all. I'm an amateur historian, and so listening to like professional historians and all of that information. I'm from Tallahassee, but I'm also from Gadsden County, from Midway, Florida, and so hearing some of that history from Gadsden County, it was just, thank you all for that. That was wonderful. Artistically, how I became to become a filmmaker, and this is my first project that I put out to the public. There were some things that I made before that were more practice, and hopefully Oprah doesn't pull those out on her couch at any point in time if I ever get to an interview with her. I was always in the arts, and my aunts, who was in attendance with me, as well as my mom, they were very good at helping to develop that art when I was young. So my first art form was drawing, then went to music, then went to stepping at some point, photography, fashion shows, yada, yada, yada. There was a battle that I think a lot of us artists might have inside of me about, being a business person, because I have a business side of my brain too, both sections of my family, both sets of my grandparents are both entrepreneurs, and so there's a large, business side that's pulling me as well. And so, the whole go to school, get a good job, and life will be a wonderful thing, that does work for a lot of people, and it worked really fantastic for my brother. He's a businessman, a corporate man, and he loves it, and that's his life. For somebody who's really deeply into the arts, that system doesn't really work, which I found out once I left FAMU. And so, I went to FAMU from kindergarten until I graduated from college. I went to FAMU High, and so I was there for 20 years and had a good time. I would recommend people go to other schools, though. It's pretty nice, Mama. Recommend people go to other schools. It's pretty nice. Get some different mascots, get some different colors and things like that. But it was wonderful to be at that school and to be a full product of an HBCU education. But when I graduated from FAMU, I graduated with a degree in economics, and I didn't, it sounds weird to say, now, especially as a grown professional filmmaker, but I didn't really, I wasn't aware of film school as an option, like people actually go to school for film. And so, I got my degree in economics. I was in computer science before that. I ended up landing a job at Wachovia Bank, and I was a branch manager for the bank, and I was working in Orlando. And learning the banking system was fantastic for the 8 months that I was learning it. But then after that, it was like, wait, this is it? This is life? Like this, I'm going to the bank and then I go home and then I go back to the bank and go home. And that really wasn't going to be a scenario that would work for me long term. And even if I left the bank and went to the car industry or went to insurance industry or something like that, I would be unsatisfied, because as an artist, you have this bubble welling up in you and you have to pop it every once in a while, or you're just out of whack. You're not in sync with life, right? And so, and at the same time, while I was at the bank, my father passed, and so he's with me here in spirit. And it puts your mortality in front of you, and it's like, I don't want to have these could've, would've, should'ves in my life. Not that my dad did, but I just didn't want to have them, and so I wanted to explore this art that had been, invested in me so long since I was an elementary school kid. And I had a short-term short-term high school teacher who was a temp. He was a temp in there, but he let me be a PA on his productions, and he let me be on his casting sessions. And so I like to say, his name is Keith Hampton. I like to say that he put the seed in me to be a filmmaker in high school, but I didn't put any water in until after I graduated from college, and find out that corporate America might not be exactly the space for me. And so I started to go to a film school down in Orlando, which was the University of Central Florida's film school. And so I took one class a semester, and to make sure that I wanted to step away from this life, because when I got to banking, my paycheck finally had a comma in it, and I like seeing that comma in my paycheck. And so I was like, do I want to leave this comma? It's got benefits and stuff. But I decided I did, because I would be unfulfilled in life, and that's not the move either, right? And so I decided to try film school lightly at the University of Central Florida. And while I was there, a professor there, started to speak really well about, Florida State's program. And I applied to different programs, 3 programs as a matter of fact. And the interesting path was my third application, my third choice, rejected me. Second choice rejected me. But first choice accepted me, which was for Florida State's program. And so, it was a wonderful program. They only take 30 students out of about 600 applicants. Somehow I tricked my way in there and was able to get into that film school and had a wonderful time. But the actual birth of this project happened before I got into film school. So I entered the film school in 2008, but I had this idea for this film in 2007. And so I went to see a wonderful movie called Sweeney Todd, which is by Tim Burton, has Johnny Depp in it. And it's a fantastic story. It's a very dark story. It's a musical, and the musical, it's a very bloody musical. It's about a barber who's coming back after a 15-year sentence that he should not have been assigned to because this judge wanted to get at his wife, and so the barber wants to get revenge on that judge by using his barber blades on him. And so the story is fantastic, and it opened my mind up to how you could tell a story through song, right? And I was like, my God, most times when I was thinking of musical, I was thinking like Hairspray or something like that, right? But seeing that project, I was like, whoa, this is good, this is good. And then when I saw Ray, Ray was fascinating to me as an artist because Ray, with Jamie Foxx in it, is actually classified as a musical, but most people don't take it like a musical because the music belongs so much in the story. But if you take anything like Ray, What's Love Got to Do with It, Walk the Line, Walk Hard, all of those that are performance musicals, those are still musicals, right? And so, between those two, and then at some point I heard a beautiful rendition of A Swing Low Sweet Chariot by a group called Acapella, and when I heard it, I saw somebody dying to it. And I was like, oh, that would be a good movie. That would be a really good movie. And so, I come in with this idea in film school. We make 3 films in the master's program at Florida State. And, I was saving this for my last film because the first film is 3 minutes. The second film is 5 minutes. This film, ends up, our thesis film is 15 minutes long by the rules of our school. And so I was saving it for that moment. But and I really wanted to invest sort of everything I had into making it. And so really the driving force for me making the film, was inspired by the music. And coming back to the information portion of it, one of the things when I was researching and finding out, how the enslaved people were communicating, how they got to get the information about the Underground Railroad, how they knew where to go. A lot of that was because of the music. The music happened because a lot of times the enslaved people, the time that they had off that Sunday maybe, they sometimes were able to get together and go to church services. Those church services might be happening, in the wilderness somewhere, right? And the songs, information was being communicated there, and then, at some point in my amateur historian, way, I'm thinking, okay, they decided to communicate this information through songs, and through which came to be church songs, a little bit later on. So it came to be gospel songs, but of course started off as spirituals, started off as work songs in the field, and the people that were the masters, they were considering themselves, just working along to a beat for the most part, but the enslaved people are actually communicating plans and communicating how they're going to get around. So we were talking about Wade in the Water. Wade in the Water is something that is sung so that people know that there's dogs chasing them, and then when they go through the water, the dogs lose their scent. Or Swing Low Sweet Chariot, one analogy of it, of course, is the spirit moving on to somewhere else. But another analogy of it is these chariots that could actually pick people up and move them into a safe place and deliver them into a safe house. And so one of the things we were trying to do with the film was have a demonstration maybe of how, they might use these songs and have these secret communications about the Underground Railroad built within the songs and communicating amongst the people.
Awesome. And that makes logical sense then that you would, it seems to naturally be a stage musical. I mean, it lends itself very well to that genre as well.
Oh yeah, as soon as I discovered it, I was like, why has nobody done this before? This is, we need to do this. We need to make this happen. And we in 2010, it was when this piece came out, so it's 11 years old now. And again, I haven't seen it for a little while, but just watching it again, it's been wonderful, so thank you for that. We originally wanted to make a feature film version of it, and we were out in Hollywood. We got a lot of attention, in the film industry, and we were having meetings and whatnot. And there was one meeting with a very popular producer that I was having. He's like, yeah, man, this is great. This is fantastic. But I don't know if we want to make it because Quentin Tarantino is making this movie called Django coming up. right? And this was 2011, I think, when I was having that meeting. And so in 2012, Django came out, then 12 Years a Slave, then The Butler, The Help, and Selma, Book of Negroes, TV show Underground, yada, 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 right? It became apparently the Marvel Cinematic Universe for slavery, between like 2012 and 2016. I was sensing that the community, the medium was getting very crowded with it, and the community might be getting fatigued with it. And so one of the things we decided to do was to transition the piece from a film into a theater piece, right, into a musical play, and a full-length musical play. And so we marched towards that, and I was in Atlanta at the time. I was living in Atlanta and started writing the piece and transitioning. And so we're taking it from a 15-minute piece to an approximately 2-hour-long musical. And so we had to expand the things about each different character. We had to expand because when for a 15-minute film, it's going to be contained. It's going to be very tight. And for a 2-hour play, we need to expand on every single piece. And so we had different thoughts, whether we should expand the number of people that we're trying to escape, whether we should expand the stories of the people that we're trying to escape. And we eventually ended up expanding the stories as opposed to expanding the number, me and one of my partners that ended up writing it. And so with the play that we had, we debuted it in 2015 at the Atlanta Black Theater Festival, and it was a wonderful production. We had to put it together pretty fast because of some things that were going on. We originally were chosen as a reading, but then the Color Purple was supposed to be their closing act for that particular festival, but then Color Purple had to pull out, and they were like, "Hey, Akil, do you want to do the full production of it?" And I'm like, hell yeah, why not, right? And so, because if they're going to be producing it, they're putting up, money to get the venue. Like, sure, we can put together the whole play. And so we had to end up fast forwarding some of the development of it, but we did end up making a wonderful production. And from there, we've had 5 productions in 4 states of the play, including one in Tallahassee. And there's going to be a 6th production that's coming up in the Monticello Opera House as well. And we was able to have a Tony Award winner direct our largest production up in New York City.
Yes, indeed. We're really excited. That's coming up in our next season 2021-2020. So we're looking at some couple of dates, probably in the fall, so do stay tuned for that. But very excited about that. In fact, you mentioned the Tallahassee production was a concert version, and so we have a few clips that we would like to show right now as a little teaser to spike your interest to attend the stage production. So let me see if I can pull that up real quick.
She's a feisty one, isn't she? Well, she won't stay away for long. The block has a way of taming the headstrong. The block has a way of taming the headstrong. The block has a way of taming the headstrong. Oh, it's where you belong.
Oh, my dead body, give me my child back, or I'll fight everybody.
Finally stop, you're gonna get yourself killed. Who's got $100 for this little one? Who can feed the bill? Who's got $100 for this little one? Who can feed the bill? I see 100, you're holding right there. Who wants to increase it by 50? It's where you belong.
We can do.
It's too dangerous, Bali. Your life you will lose.
Maybe someone can help us.
Not without getting caught. Remember, we don't have freedom papers. Remember, we don't have freedom papers. Remember, we don't have freedom papers. I'm sorry, she is lost. It's on the block.
Now let me tell you a tale about a journey far away. There was a little boy about your age. Boy, is he tore the way, worked hard day by day, but that was soon about to change. One day while digging in a ditch, he found a lantern strange and small. And when he touched it suddenly, the lantern began to speak.
Boy, for getting me out of this hole, I will take you wherever you want to go.
And the boy said, light the way, lantern, light the way, 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 lantern, light the way. Now the master wanted to have it, but the little boy, he escaped, and he found a friend to help guide him, and best friends they became. The lantern kept him safe by night.
And it's so interesting seeing those now. One of the things we had to do when we were making the play, the film itself doesn't have any elements of really happiness inside of it, other than maybe the grandma being able to communicate her story to her granddaughter. But when you're expanding it into a play and you're having 2 hours, you can't have 2 hours of just just beating people over the heads with all of this. And so there are moments that we had to be able to find joy and positivity, of course, which is the same thing that happened for our ancestors. There was moments that they had to find joy and positivity in this very harsh environment that they were living in. So the selection of songs that you chose is very interesting because that's kind of how we did it. It was like, okay, we have to start with things a little bit heavier, lighten it up, and then go back to what our actual core of the story is going to be, which is a heavier story for obvious reasons.
Yes, it's interesting too because of course that was a concert version, so the challenge I think in staging the play is the movement. Would you say that, Akil? The escape happens sort of around the stage.
Yeah, certainly that was a logistical problem. One of the things, studying film and then studying theater is, film, there's a different, what we call suspension of disbelief, meaning that the audience that's watching whatever the story is going to be, we know there's not a guy with like a Melton skeleton running around and has claws that pop out of his hand, that heals instantly, right? We know that's not a thing, but we, of course, suspend our disbelief to watch it. But a lot of people want film to be a lot closer to reality. When we're dealing with theater, our suspension of disbelief changes because we understand we're in a physical space and the story can only happen within this physical space that's here. So when I'm doing a running away scene on film, it has to be realistic and there has to be people running from one physical point to another physical point and play out, like it would be in the reality that we're creating for the film. The movement here in the stage, it's like, okay, we've got a stage that's, how long is the stage this way?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm going to guess, maybe say it's 55 feet or so.
I was going to say
something like 55 feet or so. And, how do we actually stage that through? And there's ways that we can do it, but the art of theater has to be about playing within this space. And if anybody's seen, most popularly recently Hamilton, they do a great job of playing with the space that they have and be able to communicate that. Sometimes it's people slowing themselves down, so as they're running, there might be one person that's running faster, another person that's running slower, so you get the idea. One person moving in slow motion, let me say, one person moving at maybe a more normal motion, and so you get the idea that one person is creating distance from the other person. So there's ways that we can do it, but it is a unique challenge, and that's one of the beautiful things about theater, and I love the process of theater. I think theater has a fantastic process about, being able to connect to the audience in a way. When we're making a film can, in the process of it, film can feel sometimes very disconnected because the people that you're performing to is the camera and the crew that's seen you perform it 30 times, in this one day. But when you're dealing with the play, when you're performing it, you're connecting with the people that are right there and they're feeling that energy. And they're also usually seeing a project from start to finish. When we're doing a film, we might be shooting scene 3, then we shoot scene 19, then we shoot scene 5, and then we come back and shoot scene 1. So some of the parts of the film can be inorganic in its process. And that's why I love the process of theater, because it feels very organic as we're making it.
Absolutely. Underground the Musical coming to Monticello Opera House probably this fall.
Yes, sir.
Anyway, season 2021-2022. I'd like to thank at this time Florida Humanities for supporting this panel discussion. Of course, I also want to thank very much our speakers, Akil Dupont, Jay Welch, Dr. Dixon, and David Ward. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.
And thank you all for coming. Hello, everyone. I'm Mike with the Opera House. We hope you enjoyed our panel discussion, Escaping Slavery in the Middle South, the Underground Railroad, and Beyond. If you did enjoy the program, please consider donating to the Opera House on our website at monticellooperahouse.org. We'd like to do a lot more programs just like it. Also, stay tuned for more information about Underground the Musical coming up in October of 2021. Thanks again and hope to see you soon.